Let me tell you something nobody talks about during the most wonderful time of the year, while the world is wrapped in lights, laughter, and the warm glow of togetherness. There are people sitting alone, not lost, not forgotten, just alone. And here is what most people don't understand. Some of them chose it. They looked at the chaos, the obligations, the performance of holiday cheer, and they quietly said no. Others didn't choose it at all. Life just unfolded that way. Distance, loss, circumstances beyond control. But whether by choice or by chance, there is an entire psychology unfolding in that silence. One that reveals something profound about human nature, solitude, and what it really means to belong. Society has painted a very clear picture of what Christmas should look like. Family gathered around a table, presents under a tree, voices overlapping in joyful chaos. And if your reality doesn't match that picture, it can feel like you are doing life wrong, like you've failed some invisible test of normalcy. But here is the truth. Most people won't tell you. Spending Christmas alone doesn't mean you are broken. It doesn't mean you are unloved. And it certainly doesn't mean your life is empty. Sometimes it means you've simply chosen a different kind of peace, or you are navigating a different kind of pain. Either way, there is a story behind that silence that deserves to be understood, not pitied. Psychologists have studied the phenomenon of voluntary solitude during holidays, and what they've found is fascinating. People who choose to spend Christmas alone often score higher on traits like autonomy, self-sufficiency, and emotional resilience. They're not running from connection, they're running towards something deeper. Space to breathe, permission to feel without performing, freedom from the exhausting theater of forced joy. Because let's be honest, for many people Christmas isn't joyful. It is stressful. It is expensive. It is emotionally draining. It is a day where you are expected to smile even when you are struggling, to be grateful even when you are grieving, to pretend everything is fine when it is not. And so some people opt out, not because they hate Christmas, but because they refuse to fake it. They'd rather sit in honest solitude than surrounded by hollow cheer. They'd rather spend the day in their own thoughts than in someone else's expectations. And maybe that is not sadness. Maybe that is clarity, because when you remove the noise, you start hearing what actually matters. You stop measuring your worth by how full your table is and start measuring it by how at peace you feel. And peace, real peace, doesn't always look like a Hallmark movie. But not everyone who spends Christmas alone does so by choice. For some, it is the result of geography. Families scattered across continents, loved ones too far to reach. The financial or logistical reality that makes travel impossible for others, it is loss. A parent who passed away, a relationship that ended, friends who drifted into different lives. And for them, Christmas alone isn't liberation. It is a reminder, a quiet, aching reminder of what used to be, the empty chair, the missing laughter, the traditions that died with the people who carried them. And here is where the psychology deepens. Grief doesn't follow a calendar. It doesn't take holidays off. In fact, Christmas often amplifies it. Psychologists call this anniversary grief. The way certain dates, smells, songs, or rituals can bring loss rushing back with startling intensity. So when someone spends Christmas alone after losing someone they love, they're not just alone, they're navigating an emotional minefield that the rest of the world doesn't see. They're holding space for absence in a world obsessed with presence. And that takes a kind of strength most people never have to access. There is also a subset of people who spend Christmas alone because they simply don't fit into traditional family dynamics. Maybe their family is toxic. Maybe going home means enduring judgment, criticism, or old wounds reopened. Maybe they've built a life that their family doesn't understand or accept. So they choose distance, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. And society doesn't know what to do with that. We're taught that family is everything, that you have to show up no matter what. But sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stay away. Sometimes protecting your peace means disappointing people, and spending Christmas alone becomes an act of self-love, not self-isolation. Then there are those who spend Christmas alone because they're simply introverted, and the holiday season is sensory and emotional overload. The noise, the crowds, the social obligations, it is exhausting. They don't hate people, they just need solitude to recharge. And Christmas, with all its expectations of togetherness, can feel like a marathon they didn't sign up for. So they skip it. They spend the day reading, walking, cooking something simple, watching movies in pajamas. And you know what? They're happy. Genuinely, quietly happy, because they've learned something most people resist. That rest is not laziness, and solitude is not loneliness. Here is where the cultural narrative starts to crack. We've been conditioned to believe that being alone on Christmas is tragic, that it is something to be fixed, rescued, pitied, but that assumption erases the reality of millions of people who are alone and okay, who are alone and thriving, who've built a life that doesn't revolve around one day in December. Loneliness and aloneness are not the same thing. Loneliness is a feeling of disconnection, of wanting connection and not having it. Aloneness is simply a state of being, and you can be alone without being lonely. You can be surrounded by people and feel completely isolated. The two are not synonyms, and conflating them does a disservice to those who've made peace with solitude. Psychologists talk about something called self-intimacy. The ability to be comfortable in your own company, to enjoy your own presence without needing external validation or distraction. And people who spend Christmas alone, especially those who do it willingly, often have high levels of self-intimacy. They don't need the noise to feel alive. They don't need the crowd to feel valued. They've cultivated an inner world rich enough to sustain them. And in a culture that equates worth with visibility, with busyness, with social proof, that is radical. That is countercultural. That is a quiet revolution happening in living rooms and studio apartments all over the world. But let's not romanticize it entirely. Because for every person who chooses solitude, there is someone who is drowning in it. Someone who scrolls through photos of families laughing, tables overflowing with food, faces glowing with warmth, and feels the sharp sting of exclusion. Someone who wanted to be invited and wasn't. Someone who is estranged not by choice but by circumstances they can't control. And for them, Christmas alone is not peaceful. It is painful. It is a day that highlights what they don't have, what they've lost, what they're missing. And that pain is valid. It is real. And it deserves space without judgment. There is a psychological concept called social pain, and research shows that the brain processes it the same way it processes physical pain. Rejection, exclusion, loneliness, they hurt, literally. And during Christmas, when the world seems to be one big celebration of connection, that pain can feel unbearable. So when someone says they're spending Christmas alone and they seem sad, don't rush to fix it. Don't tell them it is not a big deal. Don't minimize their experience. Sometimes people just need their pain acknowledged. They need someone to say, "That sounds hard. I am sorry you are going through that." And here is something interesting. Studies show that people who spend Christmas alone often engage in something called compensatory rituals. They create their own traditions to fill the space left by conventional ones. Maybe they volunteer at a shelter, maybe they cook their favorite meal, maybe they call a friend in a different time zone, maybe they watch the same movie every year. These rituals aren't replacements for what they're missing, they're adaptations. They're ways of saying, "This day still matters to me, even if it looks different." And there is a quiet dignity in that, in refusing to let a day define your worth just because you are experiencing it differently. There is also the reality that some people spend Christmas alone because they're working. Doctors, nurses, firefighters, emergency responders, retail workers, service industry employees, people who keep the world running while everyone else is celebrating, and their aloneness isn't chosen or tragic. It is dutiful, it is sacrificial, and often it is invisible. Society doesn't talk much about the people who spend holidays ensuring others can enjoy theirs, but they're there, alone in a different way, alone in service, and maybe that deserves recognition, not pity. Now let's talk about the people who lie about being alone on Christmas, who tell co-workers they have plans when they don't, who post old photos to make it seem like they're surrounded by family when they're actually sitting in silence. Why? Because there is stigma. Because admitting you are alone on Christmas feels like admitting failure. Like confessing you are not wanted, not loved, not enough. And that shame is cultural, not personal. We've built a world where your social calendar determines your value, where being busy means being important, where being alone means being forgotten. And that is toxic. That is a lie that keeps people hiding in plain sight. The truth is, you can spend Christmas surrounded by people and feel completely alone. You can sit at a table full of family and feel like a stranger. Proximity is not intimacy. Presence is not connection. Some of the loneliest people in the world are in crowded rooms pretending to be fine. So maybe the question isn't, are you alone? But do you feel seen? Do you feel known? Do you feel like you belong? And sometimes the answer to those questions is clearer when you are alone than when you are performing connection. You don't actually feel. There is a kind of freedom that comes with spending Christmas alone after you've done it once and survived. The fear dissipates. The stigma loses its grip. You realize the day doesn't have magical power. It is just a day, and you can shape it however you want. You can sleep in, you can eat cereal for dinner, you can ignore it entirely or honor it in your own way. You are not obligated to meet anyone's expectations, including your own. And that realization that you can exist outside the script society handed you, that is liberation. Psychologists also point out that solitude can be deeply restorative, especially after a year of exhausting social navigation. Christmas alone can be a reset, a chance to decompress, to reflect, to check in with yourself without distraction. It is a day where you don't have to be on. You don't have to manage anyone's emotions, play peacekeeper at a tense dinner, or pretend to like gifts you don't want. You can just be fully, unapologetically yourself. And for people who spend most of their lives accommodating others, that is not loneliness. That is sanctuary. Of course, there are moments that sting even for those at peace with solitude. Hearing laughter from a neighbor's apartment, seeing photos flood social media, the silence that feels heavier on this particular day than any other. Those moments are real, and they don't negate the overall choice or peace someone has found. They're just reminders that humans are wired for connection, even when we need space from it. We can be okay alone and still wish sometimes that we weren't. Here is what I think gets lost in all the noise. Christmas alone is not one story, it is 1,000 different stories. It is the widow honoring her late husband by watching their favorite movie. It is the traveler stuck in a foreign city finding beauty in unfamiliar traditions. It is the introvert finally breathing after months of social exhaustion. It is the estranged child protecting their peace from toxic family. It is the frontline worker keeping others safe. It is the person grieving, healing, resting, choosing, surviving, and each of those stories deserves respect, not assumptions. Maybe the real question isn't why someone spends Christmas alone, but why we've decided that is a problem, why we've turned one day into a measuring stick for a person's entire life, why we've equated solitude with failure and gathering with success, because when you strip away the cultural programming, Christmas is just a day. It can be meaningful or mundane. It can be joyful or painful. It can be celebrated or ignored. And none of those choices say anything definitive about who you are or what your life is worth. The people who spend Christmas alone are not a monolith. They're individuals with complex inner worlds, navigating their own realities. Some are at peace, some are in pain, some are indifferent, and all of those experiences are valid. What matters is not how many people are around your table, but whether you feel okay in your own skin, whether you are honoring your truth, whatever that looks like, whether you are surviving the day or finding unexpected beauty in it. And if you are reading this and you are spending Christmas alone, here is what I want you to know. You are not pathetic. You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are navigating your life the best way you know how. And whether you are alone by choice or by circumstance, whether you are at peace or struggling, your experience matters. Your story matters. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you spend this day. You don't have to justify your solitude or apologize for your choices. You are allowed to feel whatever you feel without shame, because in the end, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. And if spending Christmas alone helps you nurture that relationship, if it gives you space to heal, to rest, to simply exist without performance, then that is not something to mourn. That is something to honor. The world will keep spinning regardless of whether you are at a crowded table or sitting in quiet reflection. Your worth doesn't change based on your holiday plans. Your life doesn't become less meaningful because it looks different from the narrative sold to you. So maybe this Christmas, instead of pitying those who are alone, we could just let them be. Let them have their peace, their pain, their chosen solitude, their circumstantial isolation without judgment. Let them exist outside the narrow definition of what this day is supposed to look like. Because the psychology of people who spend Christmas alone isn't a tragedy. It is just human. It is just real. It is just life unfolding in all its messy, complicated, beautiful diversity. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is spend a day alone and still believe you are enough.